They asked me to change my hair if I wanted to fit in. They didn't say it like an insult, but my body heard it like one. That's the sentence that kept replaying in my head as I sat alone in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel long after the engine had gone quiet. The parking lot outside my office building was almost empty, just a few flickering lights and the low hum of traffic from the highway a block away. I could still smell the lemon disinfectant from the lobby on my clothes, sharp and clean, like something trying too hard to cover up what was already rotten. Before I continue, let me ask you something, my besties. Where are you listening from today? Here in the US, the UK, or somewhere else? And as you listen, I want you to tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. This is Voice of Mrs. Addison, and this story is not easy to tell, but it's an honest one. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. If you want to fit in here, maybe consider a more polished hairstyle. That's what she said. Calm. Smiling. As if she were suggesting a different shade of lipstick. I stared at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My hair was pulled back into a soft puff, neat edges, freshly moisturized that morning with coconut oil and a little leave-in cream my mama used to swear by. I had stood in my bathroom that morning, steam fogging up the mirror, thinking how proud I felt wearing my hair the way it grew out of my head. No heat, no chemicals, just me. Now, sitting in that car, my throat tightened like someone had wrapped a ribbon around it and pulled slow. I didn't cry right away. I never do. I just sat there, breathing shallow, listening to the tick-tick of the cooling engine, feeling something old and familiar crack open inside my chest. I had worked too hard for this moment to feel this small. Before that day, before that sentence, I thought my life was steady. Not perfect, just steady. I'm the kind of woman who finds comfort in routine. Morning coffee in the same chipped blue mug. A quick glance at the news while the toast browns just right. The sound of my husband, Marcus, clearing his throat in the bathroom like he always does before work, as if he's warming himself up for the day. We live in a modest two-story house in a quiet Maryland suburb, the kind with maple trees lining the street and neighbors who wave but don't pry. We raised our daughter, Nia, there, science fairs at the dining table, late-night talks on the edge of her bed, whispering dreams into the dark. She's grown now, off in Chicago chasing a career that makes her tired but proud. The house still smells faintly of her lavender lotion, especially when the heat kicks on. I work in human resources at a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. Benefits. A sense of purpose. I believed in the idea of helping people navigate work with dignity. That's what drew me to HR in the first place. I iron my blouses on Sunday evenings, line my shoes by the door, pack my lunch with more care than Marcus says is necessary. I like to be prepared. I like to do things right. At work, I was known as reliable, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who stayed late when deadlines crept up, the one who smiled even when meetings ran long and voices got sharp. I didn't think I stood out much, and that suited me just fine. But little things started shifting months before anyone ever said anything out loud. It began with the looks. Not hostile, just lingering. The kind that slide over you and pause, as if something doesn't quite fit. During meetings, I noticed my manager, Claire, would look at my hair and then quickly glance away. When we had a client visit, she asked everyone to step up their professional image, her eyes resting on me a second too long. I told myself I was imagining it. Then came the comments. Soft. Almost friendly. "Oh, you're so brave to wear it like that," a coworker said once in the break room, stirring sugar into her coffee. Brave. As if my hair were a protest sign. Another time, during a team lunch, someone asked if my hair was hard to manage. I laughed politely because that's what I've learned to do. Smooth things over, keep the peace, don't make it awkward. I explained it took no more time than anyone else's routine. They nodded, unconvinced. At home, Marcus noticed my silence before I did. One evening, as we sat eating baked chicken and green beans, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "You okay, Renee?" I shrugged, pushing food around my plate. "Just tired." He didn't press. He knows when to wait. The day it finally happened, the day the words were said, We were in Claire's office. The blinds were half open, letting in that dull afternoon light that makes everything look a little tired. She sat behind her desk, hands folded, her nails a pale pink. There was a faint whirring from the old printer down the hall. She complimented my performance first. Said I was valuable. Said the clients liked me. Then she leaned back slightly, tilted her head, and said it. If you want to fit in here. The sentence landed between us, heavy and quiet. I nodded, because that's what I've been trained to do. I thanked her for the feedback. I walked out with my shoulders straight, but my insides were screaming, because fitting in, apparently, meant changing the most natural part of me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the problem wasn't my work, but my existence. I didn't tell Marcus that night. I washed my face, wrapped my hair in a satin scarf, crawled into bed beside him and stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing slow into sleep. In the dark, one question kept circling my mind like a restless bird. How did simply being myself become a liability? The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual, my hands hovering near my hair like I was afraid to touch it. The light above the sink buzzed softly, casting that unforgiving glow that shows every line, every doubt. I tilted my head from side to side, studying myself the way I imagined they did at work. Not as Renee, not as a professional woman with 15 years of experience, but as a problem that needed adjusting. I reached for my brush, then stopped. The smell of coconut oil still lingered faintly in my hair, warm and familiar. It reminded me of my mama standing behind me when I was little, parting my hair carefully on Sunday mornings, humming gospel songs under her breath. God don't make mistakes, she used to say whenever I complained about tender spots or thick coils that refused to lie flat. You hear me, girl? That morning, though, her voice felt far away. I tied my scarf and went to work, my stomach tight the whole drive. At every red light, my mind replayed Claire's words, turning them over, trying to make them sound harmless. Maybe she meant well. Maybe I was being sensitive. That's what women like me are taught to think, that discomfort is just a personal flaw we need to overcome quietly. At the office, nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I felt it the moment I stepped off the elevator. The carpet smelled faintly of stale coffee, and the hum of conversation floated through the open-plan space. I smiled, greeted people like I always did, but my body was on edge, like I'd walked into a room where something fragile was already broken. During our morning meeting, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of the conference room monitor. I sat up straighter, smoothed the edges near my temples. When Claire spoke, I watched her mouth instead of her eyes. Afterward, she pulled me aside again. Just a quick check-in, she said. She mentioned a client visit coming up, emphasized first impressions. She didn't say the word hair this time, but she didn't have to. By lunchtime, my appetite was gone. I pushed my salad around, listening to coworkers talk about weekend plans and reality TV. Their laughter sounded distant, like it was coming through a wall. That afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. A memo about updated professional appearance guidelines. Neutral language. Broad terms. Nothing explicitly stated, but the examples were telling. Natural styles were mentioned alongside creative expressions, both framed as things to consider carefully in client-facing roles. I felt my cheeks burn as I read it. This wasn't just in my head anymore. When I got home, Marcus was already there, loosening his tie, humming along to some old R&B song playing softly from his phone. The smell of onions and garlic filled the kitchen. He'd started dinner, trying to surprise me. Normally, I would have teased him about overcooking the rice. Instead, I leaned against the counter and watched him in silence. He turned, took one look at my face, and his smile faded. "All right," he said gently. "Talk to me." The words came out slow at first. I told him about the meeting, the comments, the memo. I told him what Claire had said, word for word. As I spoke, my voice trembled despite my efforts to keep it steady. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening, his hands curling slightly at his sides. "So let me get this straight," he said finally. "They're saying your work is good. Your performance is solid. But somehow your hair is the issue. I nodded. He shook his head slowly. That's not about professionalism, Renee. That's about control. I swallowed. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. What if I'm overreacting? I asked. What if I just change it? Just to make things easier? The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus stepped closer, took my hands in his. His palms were warm, grounding. I'll support whatever you decide, he said. But I need you to hear this. Changing who you are to make other people comfortable will never end. They'll always find something else. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the house settle, the ticking of the hallway clock counting down seconds I couldn't get back. My mind drifted to Nia, to the world she was navigating as a young black woman. What example was I setting for her? The next day at work, I noticed things I'd ignored before. A colleague's blonde highlights praised as fresh. Another's bold red lipstick called confident. Differences were celebrated, just not mine. I scheduled a meeting with Claire. My hands shook slightly as I typed the email, but I forced myself to hit send. When I sat across from her later that week, the office felt colder than usual. I asked her directly if my hair was an issue. She sighed, like I'd burdened her. It's not about you personally, she said. It's about the company image. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. Then help me understand why my image is considered unprofessional. She didn't have an answer that made sense. Just more vague phrases. More smiles that didn't reach her eyes. I walked out of that office, knowing something fundamental had shifted. Trust, once cracked, doesn't seal itself easily. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet resolve began to form, one I didn't yet fully understand, but one that refused to be silenced. The truth is, once your eyes open, they don't close again, not all the way. You start seeing patterns where you once saw coincidences. You notice the pauses in conversation, the careful wording, the way people choose comfort over honesty. After that meeting with Claire, I began paying closer attention to everything. I noticed how my calendar suddenly filled with fewer client-facing meetings. How my role shifted quietly, subtly, without explanation. Projects I'd led for years were reassigned for efficiency. Decisions were made without my input, then delivered to me like finished facts. No one said I was being sidelined. They didn't have to. The office felt different now. The laughter around me thinned. Conversations stopped when I walked up. Even the air felt heavier, like it carried unspoken rules I was suddenly breaking just by existing as I was. One afternoon, while standing at the copier, I overheard two coworkers talking in low voices. She's good, one said. But you know clients. The other hummed in agreement. I stood there, papers in hand, my heart thudding in my ears. They didn't notice me until I cleared my throat. Their faces flushed, smiles snapping into place like masks pulled too tight. Hey, Renee, one said, overly bright. I smiled back. Polite, controlled. Then I walked away, my legs steady even as my chest felt hollow. That evening, I went straight to the bathroom when I got home. I stood under the harsh light again, the same mirror, the same reflection. I leaned closer this time, examining every curl, every coil, like I was searching for evidence of wrongdoing. What I saw instead was history. I saw my grandmother, who pressed her hair straight every Saturday night because she believed the world would be kinder to her on Sundays. I saw my mama, who stopped relaxing hers in her 40s and walked into church one morning with her natural curls out, head held high, daring anyone to say a word. I saw myself, years ago, sitting in a salon chair, the sting of chemicals on my scalp justified by the promise of being presentable. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" to no one in particular. The next day, HR, my department, called me in. It was Denise, a woman I'd trained myself, her voice careful and tight. She handed me a printed copy of the appearance policy and highlighted a section about maintaining a consistent brand. I read it slowly, my hands steady. "This applies to everyone?" I asked. She hesitated. In theory. In theory. 2 words that can excuse 1,000 injustices. I left that meeting with a growing knot in my stomach and a quiet certainty that something bigger was unfolding. This wasn't just about hair anymore. It was about erasure, about making me smaller, so I'd fit a mold that was never built with me in mind. At home, Marcus watched me pack away my lunch untouched. "They're pushing you out," he said softly. I shook my head, though part of me knew he was right. I've given them too much of my life for that. But workplaces don't need to fire you outright when they can make you uncomfortable enough to leave on your own. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. I was called into a meeting with Claire and someone from senior leadership, a man I barely knew, crisp suit, neutral expression. They praised my contributions, spoke about growth opportunities, then suggested I consider a style update if I wanted to advance further. This time, they didn't sugarcoat it. I felt my pulse in my ears, my fingers curling into my palm beneath the table. I asked them to clarify.
They did.
They wanted my hair straightened.
Heat.
Chemicals. Compliance. I nodded, thanked them for their honesty, and walked out. I didn't cry until I was in the stairwell, my back against the cool concrete wall, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. The echo of my own breathing sounded too loud, too raw. That night I told Mia. She listened quietly over the phone, then said, "Mama, they're wrong." Simple.
Certain.
"You taught me to love myself as I am," she continued. "Don't let them unteach you now." Her words settled into me like a seed. Over the weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I rested. I turned off my email notifications. I went for long walks. I sat with my thoughts, uncomfortable but honest. By Monday, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I requested everything in writing. I documented conversations. I reached out to a lawyer just to understand my rights. Each step made my heart race, but also made my spine straighten. At work, the atmosphere shifted again. I was no longer just an inconvenience. I was a risk. And people treat risks carefully. Claire's smiles disappeared. Denise avoided eye contact. Whispers followed me down the hall like shadows. But for the first time since this began, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. Because when someone tells you that who you are is a problem, the real decision isn't whether to change, it's whether to disappear quietly or stand, even when your voice shakes. And I was done disappearing. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It comes dressed in policies and smiles, delivered in conference rooms with bottled water and polite nods. And somehow, that kind hurts deeper because it makes you question your own judgment long after the meeting ends. The discovery didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a thread pulled from a seam I didn't realize was holding everything together. It started with an email I wasn't supposed to see. Denise forwarded it to me by mistake. Or maybe not a mistake at all. The subject line was harmless enough, client alignment discussion. But when I opened it, my chest tightened. The email was between Claire, senior leadership, and legal. They were discussing me. Not my performance. Not my workload. My presentation. My alignment with brand expectations. My resistance to feedback. Resistance. I reread that word over and over. Resistance sounded hostile. Defiant. Like I was causing trouble instead of responding to discrimination. One line stood out, sharp as glass. If Renee is unwilling to adapt, we may need to consider alternative paths forward. Alternative paths. I sat at my desk, the office noise fading into a dull roar. My hands felt cold, even though the room was warm. 15 years of loyalty, of extra hours and emotional labor, reduced to a problem to be managed. They weren't trying to help me fit in. They were trying to push me out, cleanly, quietly, without saying the real reason out loud. That afternoon, Claire called me into her office again. Her tone was different this time. Firmer, less patient. "We're concerned about your attitude lately," she said, folding her hands. "You seem guarded." Guarded? As if self-protection were a flaw. "I'm documenting conversations," I replied calmly. "That's not an attitude. That's clarity." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You need to be careful, Renee. This could impact your future here." I looked at her, then really looked. At the carefully styled hair, the framed leadership awards on the wall, the way comfort had made her blind. My future, I said quietly, shouldn't depend on how closely I resemble everyone else. She exhaled sharply. You're making this about race. It's not. That was the moment something inside me went still. Because when someone tells you discrimination isn't happening while actively participating in it, they're not confused. They're committed. I left her office, knowing the bridge between us had burned, whether either of us admitted it or not. 2 days later, HR scheduled a formal meeting. This time, legal was present. They laid out concerns about team cohesion and professional alignment. They referenced the appearance policy again. They suggested coaching. They suggested flexibility. They suggested everything except accountability. Then came the part that broke me. They offered me a lateral move, same pay, less visibility. No client-facing work. A temporary adjustment, until I decided to make the recommended changes. I stared at the document on the table, my name typed neatly at the top. This was the betrayal. Not because they wanted me to change my hair, but because they were willing to quietly dismantle my career when I refused. I felt a heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed steady. So let me understand, I said. You're asking me to choose between my identity and my growth. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're offering options. No, I said. You're issuing an ultimatum. Silence settled over the room, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't sign anything. That evening, I told Marcus everything. He listened, his face unreadable, then pulled me into a hug so tight it finally loosened the tears I'd been holding back. I don't want to fight, I whispered into his shoulder. I just want to be treated fairly. He kissed the top of my head. Sometimes fairness only comes after the fight. The next few weeks were a blur of documentation and quiet tension. I spoke with my lawyer regularly. I filed a formal complaint. I named what was happening, even when my hands shook as I typed. At work, the shift was immediate. People avoided me, not out of anger, but fear. Fear is contagious in workplaces like that. No one wants to be next. But there were moments of unexpected grace. A junior analyst stopped by my desk one afternoon and whispered, "Thank you for standing up. It matters." A woman from accounting left a note in my drawer. You're not wrong. Small things. But they kept me grounded. The betrayal reached its peak the day I was removed from a project I'd built from the ground up. No explanation. Just a calendar update I wasn't included in anymore. I went to the restroom and locked myself in a stall, pressing my forehead against the cool metal door. I didn't cry. I just breathed. I thought about my mama again. About how she taught me that dignity isn't loud, but it's firm. When I walked back to my desk, I knew I wouldn't bend. Because the truth was clear now, this wasn't about fitting in. It was about shrinking. And I had spent too many years becoming myself to undo it for anyone. The decision to act didn't come with fireworks or sudden bravery. It arrived quietly on an ordinary Tuesday morning as I folded laundry and listened to the low hum of the washing machine. Marcus had already left for work. The house was still, sunlight stretching across the living room floor in thin gold lines. I held one of his dress shirts in my hands, smoothing the fabric, and thought about how many times I had smoothed myself for other people. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to wait for them to decide my worth. I called my lawyer before I even finished the last load. My voice was calm when I told her I was ready to move forward. She didn't sound surprised. You've done everything right, she said. Now we let the truth speak. The formal complaint turned into an investigation faster than I expected. Suddenly, the same leadership that had dismissed my concerns wanted meetings, documentation, clarification. They asked questions they already knew the answers to, hoping I'd contradict myself. I didn't. I answered carefully, factually. I let my notes guide me when emotions threatened to blur my memory. I described the comments, the policy shifts, the sidelining, the ultimatum. And I spoke about the hair, not as a style choice, but as an identity marker that had been framed as a liability. Each interview left me drained. I'd come home and sit in the car for a few minutes before going inside, breathing through the tightness in my chest. Marcus learned to give me space when I needed it and comfort when I asked. Some nights, we barely talked. Other nights, we stayed up late, whispering fears into the dark like secrets we couldn't carry alone. At work, the tension reached a breaking point. Leadership sent out a company-wide email announcing a review of appearance policies. It was carefully worded, neutral, meant to look proactive. But everyone knew why it was happening. Suddenly, people started talking. Not loudly, not publicly, but in hallways, in hushed tones near the elevators. Stories surfaced, comments that had been brushed off, moments of discomfort others had swallowed because they didn't think they had a choice. I wasn't alone. One afternoon, Denise stopped by my desk. She looked nervous, her hands twisting together. "I should have done more," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. I found it along with fear. "Thank you," I replied. "That matters." As the investigation continued, I was given the option to take leave. I declined. I refused to be erased under the guise of self-care. Instead, I showed up every day, dressed the same, hair the same, shoulders squared. Not defiant, just present. The confrontation came in a final meeting with senior leadership. They sat across from me, no smiles this time, just seriousness. They acknowledged missteps. They admitted the policy had been applied inconsistently. They said the right words, words polished by legal review. They offered a settlement. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was accountability wrapped in compromise. I listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. I didn't rush. When I left that room, the building felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. That night, Marcus and I sat on the couch, the TV off, the room quiet except for the ticking clock. "So what now?" he asked. I thought about it, about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd gained. "I choose myself," I said finally. "Whatever that looks like next." The next weeks brought change. Claire was quietly removed from her role. The appearance policy was revised. Mandatory bias training was announced. None of it came with apologies from the people who mattered most, but it came with acknowledgement. The public consequence wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Reputations shifted. Conversations changed. People became more careful, not just with me, but with each other. And me? I was tired, but I was free. I accepted a transition package and began planning my exit on my own terms. My last day came quietly. I packed my desk slowly, touching each object like a memory. The junior analyst hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You changed things," she said. I smiled softly.
"So will you."
As I walked out of the building for the final time, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I paused, took a deep breath, and felt something unfamiliar settle into my bones.
Peace.
The morning after my last day, I woke up before my alarm and lay there listening to the quiet. Not the anxious quiet that used to greet me before workdays, the kind that pressed against your chest, but a softer one. The house breathed around me. Pipes clicked. A bird called from somewhere outside the window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dread getting up. I padded into the kitchen barefoot and brewed coffee, the rich smell filling the air. I wrapped my hands around the mug and stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the yard. There was no rush, no calendar reminders tugging at my attention. Still, healing didn't come all at once. Some days I felt light, almost giddy with relief. Other days I felt raw. I'd catch myself reaching for my work badge that no longer hung by the door, or rehearsing conversations that had already ended. Trauma doesn't leave just because the door closes behind it. I started therapy a few weeks later. The therapist's office smelled faintly of eucalyptus, her voice calm and grounded. She listened as I unpacked years of minimizing myself to survive spaces that weren't built for me. "You were taught to endure," she said gently. "Now you're learning how to choose." That sentence stayed with me. I spent long afternoons journaling, writing things I'd swallowed for years. About the first time I was told my hair was distracting back in college. About the interview where I'd been asked if I could keep it professional. About how many times I'd nodded instead of pushing back because I needed the job. I wasn't angry anymore. I was honest. Marcus noticed the change before I did. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky fade from blue to purple, he squeezed my hand. "You're lighter," he said. I smiled. "I feel like I can breathe again." Opportunities came quietly, not through headlines or big announcements. A former colleague reached out about consulting work, diversity training, policy reviews. I hesitated at first, afraid of stepping back into spaces that had hurt me. But this time, the terms were mine. I took the first contract slowly,
Carefully.
and something surprising happened. I loved it. Not because it was easy, but because it was honest. I could name things plainly. I could say this harms people without worrying about being labeled difficult. Word spread. Soon, my calendar filled again, but with purpose. With clients who wanted change, not optics. With conversations that felt real. One afternoon, I spoke at a small panel for young professionals. As I stood at the podium, I scanned the room and saw women with natural hair in every style imaginable: twists, locks, afros, braids. Their eyes were attentive, searching. I told them my story. Not dramatically, just truthfully. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her voice trembling. "I thought I had to change to succeed," she said. I looked at her and saw myself years ago. "You deserve success as you are," I replied. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." At home, Nia called often. She told me about her work, her challenges, her victories. One night, she said, "I'm proud of you, Mama." Those words wrapped around my heart like a bomb. Healing also meant forgiveness. Not for them, but for me. Forgiving myself for the times I'd stayed quiet. For the years I'd confused survival with acceptance. I stood in front of the mirror one morning, the same mirror that once reflected doubt. I touched my hair gently, smiled at my reflection, and felt something settle deep within me. This was me. No adjustments required. The world didn't suddenly become fair. Discrimination didn't vanish because I spoke up. But my silence did. And that changed everything. Sometimes healing doesn't look like winning. Sometimes it looks like standing in your own kitchen, early in the morning, coffee warming your hands, realizing you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to anyone. What they asked me to change was never just my hair. It was my history, my culture, my right to take up space exactly as I am. I used to believe fitting in was the same thing as belonging. I know better now. Belonging doesn't demand pieces of you as an entry fee. It doesn't ask you to shrink, straighten, soften, or erase yourself to make others comfortable. And if there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. When people call your authenticity a problem, it's usually because it exposes something they refuse to confront in themselves. I still walk into rooms where I'm the only one. I still feel the weight of expectation sometimes. But I no longer carry shame where pride should live. I wear my hair the way it grows. I speak when something feels wrong. And I choose peace over permission. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been asked to change something about yourself just to be accepted? Something natural. Something sacred. Something that made you you? And if you have, what did it cost you to stay silent? If this story spoke to your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, or the strength you're still learning to claim, I invite you to stay connected with me here on Voice of Mrs. Addison. This channel is a safe place for real stories, real healing, and real conversations that many are afraid to have out loud. Subscribe, share the story with someone who needs it, and leave a comment below, because your voice matters here. Until next time, remember this. You were never too much. You were never unprofessional. You were never the problem. You were just powerful in a world that wasn't ready to see you.